Hey, everybody. Good to see you back again. This is Daniel Davis on Deep Dive with Daniel Davis. This is where the show where we tell you, here's what the main media is not telling you. You got a lot of time from the left and from the right, the different viewpoints, but there's hardly anybody that ever tells it what's going on that you need to know about from regular people. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Today's episode is going to feature something that really is important to so many people in the country and certainly to anybody who's ever been to Afghanistan. As everybody knows now, very painfully so, that after 20 disastrous years of war in Afghanistan in August 2021, the administration finally decided to get out of Afghanistan. And of course, it was completely chaotic. It was done very poorly. Led to a lot of loss of life, both of American and even more so of Afghan civilians due to a suicide bomber. Now, this was war, and sometimes bad things happen in war, and you can't prevent some things. But any kind of after-action review has to tell you honestly what did happen, what worked right, what worked bad, what was good, what needs to be changed, and if anything happened that requires some kind of accountability, if somebody made an avoidable mistake, especially one that cost some people's lives, then action needs to be taken about that. That's what Americans expect. That's what they get in their life. If you are at your job, if you go to your work and you make a mistake and it costs the company, millions of dollars or something, there's going to be somebody held to account. If you're in the military, if you lose some of your sensitive items, if you lost a weapon or so, man, you're going to have some serious repercussions there, as I can attest after my 21 years of active service. But when it comes to the top brass, unfortunately, there seems to be a different standard. And we're going to see a little bit of that today. And I'm going to tell you what the real story is and what you need to know and what should actually have happened. Now, first of all, in last week, the Washington Post ran a piece that said that the Central Command Commander, the CENTCOM, has decided to reopen the Afghan study that they did to post the withdrawal to find out, what went wrong. They did an analysis of it and they closed that. They said they did a very thorough job and they were asked about it here recently. Near the anniversary of the withdrawal, and we have John Kirby, former spokesman for the Pentagon, now for the White House, and he had this to say.
I understand that you'd rather talk, and the president would rather talk about the decision to end the war in Afghanistan. I think a lot of people are concerned about how it happened, the implementation of the withdrawal, and why it seems so chaotic, and why warnings about suicide bombers might not have been heeded, and the rest.
Look, I think Central Command, who was the overarching military command, did a pretty exhaustive investigation of this, Jake, and they determined that barring any decision that could have impacted mission success, there wasn't much that could be done to prevent that attack from coming, as tragic as it was. And there was a lot of confusion outside the gate. But inside that gate, the rules of engagement were clear. The commanders were on the ground. At the moment of the explosion, there were quite a few commanders there in charge and leading. And of course, everybody responded bravely after the attack. So I understand, again, the pain, and we understand the anguish. Nobody can replace the loss that these families have suffered. But there was an exhaustive investigation. CENTCOM and the Army tried to learn from that. And we'll continue to carry those lessons with us forward.
An exhaustive examination was done. An exhaustive. He reemphasized that twice during that clip. Now let's hear from somebody who was on the ground and actually was wounded in that very attack, and let's see what his position is.
I ask you to please ask me about getting shot at the tower in Abbey Gate and how no one wanted my report post-blast. Even NCIS and the FBI failed to interview me. Ask me to elaborate on my ordeal post-blast, and ask me about this one little girl and her family that I reunited. Our military members and veterans deserve our best because that is what we give to America. The withdrawal was a catastrophe, in my opinion, and there was an inexcusable lack of accountability and negligence. The 11 Marines, 1 sailor, and 1 soldier that were murdered that day have not been answered for. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak.
Now, I would love to hear more from that soldier, and I think America deserves to hear more from that soldier. So let's hope that the story from the Washington Post is correct, that they are going to open an investigation. Now, the only reason they're even getting there is because of men like this Marine who had the courage to come forward and directly contradict what you saw John Kirby emphatically telling the American people, that an exhaustive study had been done Yet they didn't even talk to one of the guys directly involved. There was another discussion where one of the people involved said that he had what he thought was the bomber in his sights, asked for permission to engage, was denied permission for various reasons. They said that the rules of engagement were not met. So the rules of engagement, unlike what Kirby said, were not clear, and it's still unclear to this day whether that might have prevented the disaster itself. Now, talking about the disaster, look, we have to admit this is a war, and nothing is clean. The enemy has a vote. They have an opportunity to try and thwart your plans. I mean, the whole point is we're trying to win a battle against them. They're trying to win one against us, and both sides are going to use lethal force to try and win it. So you can't expect a clean situation, and nobody does. I personally had 4 total combat deployments, 2 of which were in Afghanistan. So I have some direct knowledge of what that's like, and nobody expects perfection at all. What we do expect, and in fact demand, is accountability when disastrous, avoidable mistakes were made, especially those that cost lives. Now, in a discussion not very long ago with the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, he was grilled by a member of Congress and asked some very, very telling questions, very legitimate questions. And let's see what his answers were to those, especially in terms of accountability.
Secretary Austin, last week, General McKenzie repeated that he has many regrets about the botched, deadly, and embarrassing withdrawal from Afghanistan, and that he supports investigations into that withdrawal. A moment ago, you said you executed the president's order. You didn't tell us what you advised the president to do. But do you have regrets about the withdrawal from Afghanistan?
I support the president's decision.
Do you have regrets about the withdrawal or how the withdrawal occurred from Afghanistan that cost the lives of 13 of our service members?
I don't have any regrets.
You don't have any regrets. Secretary Austin, it's very telling. Secretary Austin, has there ever been any accountability for anyone within the Department of Defense for the deadly, botched, and embarrassing withdrawal from Afghanistan? Any accountability?
Hey, listen, our troops evacuated 124,000 people off of that airfield.
Has anyone been held accountable? If a Navy captain grounded a ship, what happens immediately?
Typically, that captain is removed.
That captain is removed. Has anyone been held accountable for what happened in Afghanistan?
To my knowledge, no.
You don't regret it? No one's ever been held accountable? Mr. Chairman, this is why this Republican majority must provide the accountability that this administration wants to sweep under the rug.
That is astounding to me to hear the Secretary of Defense say that he has no regrets and that no one has been held accountable for anything. Now, again, you can make the argument that it was a chaos of war and these people were killed by an enemy, and sometimes that happens in war. It's an unavoidable, if horrible thing about war. But if there was actually a possibility and there was some evidence that things weren't right, that the bombing could have been thwarted, then there does need to be a very deep and honest investigation. Even more so than that, there were, as not many people remember anymore because it's definitely not like to talk about at the highest levels, there was 10 people, a family, and several of which were children, which were killed in the aftermath of this bombing because our people thought that there was another suicide bombing coming in, because there was reports at the time that might not be the only attack, that more could come. And that was probably a legitimate threat. But when this family was killed, if you looked at the footage as I have and looked at all the situations there, it was very clear it was not necessary. There was no compelling risk to our troops, yet we launched a missile that hit a house in the middle of Kabul, killed 10 people, one of whom actually worked for the United States and was wanting to get his children out into the American. Instead, they were killed. Now, you can say that was a tragic mistake, but when you look and you see what happened, that family died avoidably. They should not have died. It is unimaginable, unconscionable that no one was held accountable to that. And to this day, that's not even on the list. And that's what should be on there at the top of the list. If we did something that resulted in civilian people being unnecessarily killed, and avoidably so, especially children in a family, somebody should be held accountable for that. But this is just part of a broader problem that we have in the Department of Defense, and even in the top of the government for that matter. is that nobody wants to be held accountable for anything that happens. They want to say they have no regrets. They want to say, no, we did a lot of good things. And true enough, there are some good things in there. There was some remarkable things that the U.S. military did in getting hundreds of thousands of people out of there with such little notice. And look, we also got to talk a bigger issue about the war itself. It wasn't just the withdrawal that was botched. It was 20 years of disastrous policies that resulted in the Afghan government collapsing and the Afghan military collapsing. And no one has been held accountable for any of those. We have general after general, decade after decade, and on presidents, senior military members, ministers, secretaries of defense. I mean, all of these highest level people always telling the American people things were getting better. Things are improving. We're making progress. They're getting better each day. None of it was ever true. No one has been held accountable to this date. And we have, aside from the thousands of Afghan casualties, which also need to be addressed, you have, I think it's upwards of 20,000 American service members who were wounded. And I think it was, the number was 2,000 or 3,000 that were killed altogether during the time in Afghanistan. Hundreds of thousands more suffered PTSD and traumatic brain injury during this war. We owe it to them to get to the bottom of things that happened. And if people made mistakes, they need to be held accountable for it. Because imagine, if nobody's ever held accountable for what they do, where is the motivation not to make mistakes in the future? People get careless. That's why that family of 10 was killed, because people were careless. They weren't worried about any consequences. They just said, well, that's not an American, so maybe it's him, maybe it's not. Who knows what really happened? But we do know that they did not need to take that shot, and somebody gave the authorization to fire and probably had it cleared at a higher level, and now no one has been held accountable. And those family members to this day still have no justice. And America is supposed to be built on justice, and it's something that we should demand of our highest leaders. It's time that we really do a genuine investigation of all the things that happened, both with that bombing, with the situation at the airport where the American lives were lost, and in the 20 years that led up to that disaster. And somebody needs to be held accountable. I don't want one more story, one more report that just tells me what we already know happened, and then period, end of story. No one gets held accountable. It's time for somebody to be held accountable when something goes avoidably, disastrously wrong. And that's the deep dive today.